This isn't just a podcast, it's a movement. The Middle Ground Mike is fighting for truth and unity. Subscribe now or support us today. Links are in the notes. Stand with us.
This is the place where we stop choosing sides and start choosing truth. Tonight's episode matters because while social media argues and politicians posture, Iran is quietly reshaping the Middle East, and almost no one is talking honestly about it. Are we making another move against China with what is going on in Iran? And that's why I'm joined by the middle ground expert on foreign policy, Ron B. Iran's leadership survives, not because it's strong, but because it exploits fear, confusion. If you're tired of outrage without answers, you're in the right place. No left, no right. Forward. Let's get into it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Middle Ground Mike. Before we start understanding this, almost everything you've been told about Iran is framed to push you to essentially two emotional reactions, sympathy or war. Both are useful. Not sure which one's honest, which is why we got our middle ground expert on foreign policy here, Ron B. Ron, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hi, Joe. Happy to be with you at this critical time.
Yeah, last time we did, the focus was on Venezuela, and man, things shifted really fast. Something that I meant to ask you about is, I know Russia and China have strong ties in Iran, just like Venezuela, or they did, I should say.
Yes.
Is this any chance in part related to any of that, or are they just kind of like two separate things that kind of came about?
No, it's all part of the new geopolitics of the post-Cold War world, namely who's aligning with whom for their own national interests. We've noticed that a certain cadre of authoritarian type regimes have banded together, whether in formal alliance or informal commerce, and the sale of military hardware, the sale of nuclear materials and that sort of thing. But the two most important, of course, are Russia and China, that came together with 10 agreements on the sale of oil from Russia to China right before the invasion of Ukraine. And the Russians have always been involved with the Iranian nuclear program. And in particular, now they also supply arms to the Iranians and air defense systems, but also have been using Iranian missiles and drones in Ukraine. North Korea is part of this new axis of authoritarianism, if we want to call it, and they have provided 10,000 troops as well as ammunition to the Russians in Ukraine. Venezuela has been, part of that network simply because they espouse communism, Bolivarian kind, and with their large reserves of oil, have manufactured oil for China and Cuba. And Cuba, of course, probably the oldest communist area in the hemisphere after the 19th revolution of Fidel Castro. So this whole group now is sort of coordinating because they've been looked at as anti-Western as well as anti-democratic, which they are, and now form a certain loose axis of authoritarianism, if you want to call it, or a loose group of allies. It's more formal between China and Russia. They actually signed off on an agreement that they are in an alliance to help one another out. The others a little more loosely because it's a bit different in each case.
No, for sure. The strong countries to me just don't execute their own people at record levels. So what does that tell us about Iran right now, like with what the Ayatollahs or Khamenei's, what they're thinking, going through?
Well, a number of things are happening that indicate that Iran is on the verge of collapse. The Islamic Republic of Iran. That is, they have economic problems, economic collapse. There's been a terminal decline in the economy, which includes hyperinflation, includes their currency has collapsed. It's been downgraded 50 to 75% over the last year. It's now 1.4 million rials to the dollar, whereas last year it was 400,000. There is a drought in Iran, so the last 5 years, so they can't grow any food, so they have to buy it from overseas. They buy the food from overseas. It's now 5 times more expensive every week. So there's not enough water because of the drought to fill the reservoirs. There's not enough food. The Iranian merchant class can't operate if there is not a stable currency. In fact, that's what was different about this particular revolt, that it was started within the merchant class. There have been other revolts, street protests. 2009, there was one, 2000, and a big one, 2019. These were all over inflation, the cost of oil, the economy, and then in 2022-23, over the death of a young woman who, let's see, what was her name? Oh, yes, I have it here. It was Masa Amina, who refused to wear a hijab and was taken in by the morality police and murdered in one of their stations. That caused a whole movement called Women, Life, and Freedom, which was ceremonially put down by the Iranians the same way they're putting down the people's protests in this particular case, namely with by shooting them, arresting them, hanging them in the public square. So you've got the economic collapse going on. You have the alienation of the elite that may not be saying anything, but that's the merchant class that can't make any money because the economy is collapsing. You have widespread popular anger,
Right.
and that popular anger. There's been, protests of over 1,000 people in over 100 cities in all 31 provinces of Iran. So this was not your common everyday protest, and so this has given hope to those that are overseas, expat Iranians, that this may be the end of the regime. Besides that, you have the regional proxy collapse of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis that are all supplied by Iran, can't be supplied anymore because they don't have any money. And also Israel has done a decent job, along with some help from the United States, to eliminate the proxy threat that was funded by Iran surrounding Israel. So you have that, and there's a increased public sentiment that they want to end the regime. And all of these 5 things, economic collapse, alienation of the elite, the widespread popular anger, the regional proxy collapse, and this public sentiment for regime change that went from not just the business class, but to women and youth who don't want to live under Sharia law. They want to have more freedom, and they certainly want more food and water. No country can survive very long on an empty stomach.
I mean, you're not wrong at all. I mean, that's spot on. I mean, if that regime is nervous at home, that explains why the chaos, seemed to erupted. And, they really haven't fought a real war of any substance in decades, at least from my knowledge. So why does it always feel like that they're on edge?
Well, that's a good question. It has something to do with, it's called the Islamic Revolution, where they're trying to spread the revolution to other places. And there is a divide between the Shia religion, which is Iranian, and the Sunni religion, which are most of the other Arabs, and the Islamic wars of the 7th century, which conquered Persia. And some might say that Islamic wars were really of Arab nature, so they weren't really Persian. At least some would say that. Others would say that they adopted it on their own. Back in the 1500s, there was something called the Safavid Empire that was around for 300 years, and they really established Shia Muslim state with Sharia law during that time period, and that was somewhat of a precursor for the Islamic Republic that came into being in 1979. Remember, after the Shah was thrown out in 1979, there was a war between Iraq and Iran. And Iraq was led by Saddam Hussein, who was Sunni, and a secular Sunni, did not believe very much in in religion other than becoming a dictator, and so he invaded Iran, and there were over 2 million casualties from 1980 to 1988. Human waves of people were going up against machine guns and rockets. It was a terrible, terrible war with over 2 million casualties. Each side suffered at least 500,000 deaths. And so that was an important conflict that actually predated the invasion, the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1991. The reason why they could invade Kuwait in the first place is they had stopped the war with Iran. But that war also made the Iranians more interested in nuclear weapons because Iraq, as you remember, had a nuclear weapons program, and they didn't want to see Iraq have one. They couldn't have one too. And so they went to work secretly on their own nuclear weapons program after that war. So that was pretty important. Now, and it became very important for the Israelis, especially because the Iranians are vehemently against not just the Israelis, but against the United States, because we represent the great Satan and the little Satan, as we're referred to. And there are many, many rallies at which we have heard, and we still hear, death to America and death to Israel as the opening chants to get the crowd all riled up.
Yeah, that is I like
so
those ones definitely make the news every time.
Yeah, I mean, in Lebanon, it was made into almost a daily ritual, where whenever the pro-Iranian Hezbollah came out to give a speech in the main square, it always started out with death to America and death to Israel. So there you have it, and that should tell us something.
Yeah, no, it definitely should. It's the same indirect strategy, that Iran seems to have, right? But they, what is their name? Goldie Amari, right? So she kind of related to that, as she warns that the proxies that some people label as independent is a lie. Does that give us like a blind spot to some of this?
Well, yeah, you need to understand that each of the charters of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis all see the destruction of Israel as part of their charter. That there is no way that the state of Israel can coexist next to their community, and the community in the Sunni world is called the Ummah. And so the problem for Israel is that how do you negotiate with somebody who doesn't recognize your right to exist? That's a problem. And Hamas didn't, nor does Hezbollah, nor the Houthis. And these were all being instructed, fed, nourished, provided with weapons, missiles, and training by the Islamic Republic of Iran, and in particular, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is at the heart of the repression of the Islamic Republic of Iran, at home and abroad.
Okay. Well, I did not know that. That's very interesting, actually.
Well, the guy who was assassinated by drone, Soleimani, was one of the heads of that organization. And he was in Iraq to cause trouble and paid for that trip with his life.
Jesus. Do you think that there's, Iran always seems to win leverage games with us these last 20, 30, 40 years.
What do you mean by that?
Washington, well, not the strikes necessarily, but they always seem to find a way to hang on, like the regime, like these indirect things that we try to do to kind of cut them off. They always seem to find a way to, like, at least just from an outsider's perspective, right? They seem to find a way to hang on, but this time it doesn't feel like they're going to be able to.
Let's take a quick break.
The Middle Ground, Mike, isn't just another podcast. It's a movement for unity, for truth, for a future beyond the left and the right. But movements don't grow without people willing to stand up. Subscribe now on Buzzsprout. Fuel this mission directly on PayPal. Every subscription keeps the fire burning. The links are in the show notes. Be more than a listener. Be part of the Middle Ground.
Well, hard to know. Let's do a couple of comparisons here. Iran is 3 times the size geographically of Iraq. It's 3 times the population of Iraq, which means 90 million people live there. That's a lot of people. And it's a huge area, landmass, even though Iraq's no joke either in terms of how large it is. But look how much trouble we had in conquering Iraq. And we had trouble with intelligence. We thought there were weapons of mass destruction there. They had already been destroyed by the IAEA, and we couldn't find any others. So if our intelligence was bad in Iraq, it's probably worse in Iran. The Israelis have good intelligence in Iran because many Iranians were Jewish who left, and they know the country and could get back in. They have developed a network of agents across the country, which has informed and did inform their 12-day war with Iran recently, which knocked out many of their air defenses, which allowed for us to come in and hit their 3 nuclear sites. The Iranians don't have any love lost for Israel or the United States. At least the Islamic Iranians do not, because they see us as the greatest threat to their existence. Now they have to worry about their own people on top of that.
Geez, I really think about that. I guess try to think of the best way to word it. When you look at Iran, I guess at least one of the big things that I've always seen that they tend to talk about, obviously beyond the Ayatollahs, like when I was talking to you about the Shahs, it's like some of the not necessarily misconceptions, right? Because I don't know them, but more of the, what am I looking for? More of the unknowns that aren't talked about, as much in the generalities, right? Like without like confusing people or like, how do we get them to understand that?
Well, I remember way back in the dark ages when I was an undergraduate at the University of California, San Diego, I met Gerald Ford. It was 1978, 79, and he was president right before Jimmy Carter. In a public forum, I asked him if we were partly responsible for what was happening in Iran because of our installation of the Shah in 1953 with British intelligence and the CIA cooperating. And he was quite honest, getting back to me in front of, there must have been 200 people in the auditorium at the time. He said, well, we had our national interests involved, so we had to go in. And those national interests meant installing Mohammad Reza Pahlavi as the Shah of Iran, who we provided with just about every weapon systems short of the atomic bomb. And he had his own secret program to do that on the side, it turns out. But he was also, besides westernizing the Iranian economy and allowing women to vote, go to university and drive and all of that, everyone wore Western dress and that sort of thing, and they had civil rights. He also had his own secret police called the Savak, which did not allow any dissent. There were 3 or 4 other political parties besides the Shah's political parties that developed, but they were all shut down and with a very heavy hand by the Savak. So it was the Shah's way or the highway, and that didn't sit well out in the provinces where there were more rural and more religious majorities of Muslims who thought that he'd gone too far towards the West. And so he had sent the Ayatollah Khomeini to exile in Paris during his reign, and that person became the rallying cry for younger students who felt like that the Shah had westernized beyond what was acceptable to Islamic Sharia law. And so that became one of the focal points of resistance that led to the downfall of the Shah. And he was also sick at the time because he had prostate cancer and was going to the United States for treatments that didn't work out. But the United States and the Shah were seen as joined at the hip, all right? And so that is why the Islamic Republic that came in afterwards saw us as enemies of that state. And they, as you may recall, took 53 of our citizens hostage at the American embassy in Tehran. We had a Operation Eagle Claw that crashed in the desert under Jimmy Carter, tried to rescue the hostages. That didn't work out. And then when Ronald Reagan came in, he negotiated an arms for hostages deal that was quiet, but the hostages came home, and thus started the Islamic Republic of Iran with its strict interpretation of the Quran and hatred for the United States and Israel.
Is when it comes to Iran, it's the uncomfortable question. Do they even need a nuclear weapon to win? Because, from what they're saying with the protesters, how they've supposedly calmed them down or gotten control.
Well, the nuclear weapon is for strategic purposes that they'd like to wield over the rest of the Middle East for their own reasons. The Israelis see it as an existential threat because, here's if Iran, with a country of 90 million, is going to attack a small country like Israel with 17 million, if even that, it's unacceptable to Israel that Iran acquire a nuclear weapon, and you can understand that from their perspective. And they have attacked other nuclear programs, the first being the Iraqi program in 1981. I can tell you the date. It was June 6, 1981. It was my first day at the IAEA in Vienna, Austria, and it became a very busy day for me as well as for Hans Blix, who was the new Secretary General of the IAEA. And so Iraq was one of the signatories of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and so they had to let inspectors in to see what was happening. That Israel didn't believe anything that the inspectors were seeing or not allowed to see, and so bombed the reactor called the Ozark reactor outside Baghdad, and that was in 1981. In 2007, they bombed a reactor in Syria. September of 2007, that was on its way to making nuclear weapons, and they were certainly worried about the Iranians and prepared to strike. They have something called the Begin Doctrine, which means that and Begin was around when they struck the Ozark reactor in Iraq. That means if it even appears like a country is developing a nuclear weapon that could be used against Israel, that you have a right and a responsibility to preemptively knock it out. Preemptive non-proliferation started in 1981 for Israel, went on in 2007. They're fully prepared to do it during the 12-Day War, but the United States decided it had the technology to be able to knock out the underground facilities of Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow in particular.
I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense.
A little background and context of how we got here.
Right. No, I mean, that's actually pretty important. Do they seem to just wait out our elections?
Well, the elections they have, they're all, kind of internal affairs, and they're all picked, and there are elections in Iran, but only within a certain range of motion, if you will, and they have to be allowable candidates and acceptable candidates to the Ayatollah, or else they can't run, and the mullahs, or else they can't run, and they have to be, in line with the IRGC's interest as well. And so the elections that happen there are different from our elections. And you may remember President Obama made a speech where he said that we want to have better relations with Iran. This was the start of the talks for a nuclear deal that was made with Iran, but overturned under the first Trump administration. And then the Biden administration put it back in place, and now it's been dumped again. But more than just dumped, it was bombed. The nuclear facilities were bombed by the United States because they were getting close to a nuclear weapon. In fact, the president said within a couple of months of developing a nuclear weapon, so they had to do this.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean,
Yeah.
It's when you really look at this whole situation, are we overlooking the regional effect that this could have in the Middle East?
No, I don't think so. It's This is complex sports going on here. You know what I mean? It's not like the football game ends after 4 quarters or the baseball game once in a while will go on for extra innings. This is an extra innings game that it doesn't have an end. It's almost a perpetual chessboard of how does one maintain our own interests in an area that has so many conflicting interests of their own. And so the complexity of it alone is so overwhelming to most of the public that they just assume watch the playoffs and stay out of the game, which most people do. That foreign policy is the least important thing in anyone's life. When it comes to an election, it's always the economy, stupid, which was a Clinton phrase. And it is the economy normally that drives elections. And it's the economy that drove the people in the streets of Iran. Namely, the economy's collapsing and they couldn't have enough food and water to live a respectable life. And the country was still saying they were going to rebuild their missile and nuclear weapons programs when nobody had food on the table or water coming through their water spout. So, I mean, foreign policy is only important when there's a war and then people start paying attention. When their family members who are part of the military have to go into harm's way and support the national interests of our country or of other countries. So there's been a lot of conflict during this particular administration, some of which we understand pretty well, but most of which we don't understand because it takes a while to dig back into the background and context before you know what the options are and how they affect the United States.
Yeah, I mean, when you're thinking about that, when we're talking about like regional impact, right? The people of Iran are the ones that hurt the most in, the economy, right? I believe if I heard right the other day on the news, it's 50 or 100% inflation rate is what they're going through.
Right now, it's about 52%. And, what's our inflation rate here now? 3.
I think like 2 or 3, yeah.
2 or 3.
Jeez. I mean,
And so
people here are going crazy.
Yeah, times that by, how many? You do the math. But the fact of the matter is they can't, because they have no domestic food production, they have to buy their food and medicines from overseas. And it's becoming more expensive by the day with 50% inflation, and people are going hungry. And they hold their government responsible for it because, number one, all these sanctions being placed on them happen to be because of a nuclear program and their failure to come to the table over, at least during this particular administration. The Democratic administrations, they did make a deal, but many saw that as unenforceable, and others saw it as inadequate, and in particular, the Republican Party saw it as inadequate. The Israelis saw it as inadequate. So that also played into this.
That's definitely, that inflation, I can't get over the inflation. That would make people here just flip out.
It would. You know that there would be whoever was in charge with that sort of inflation in this country would not have much more time in government.
I don't even think there'd be elections at that point. People would just be surrounding Washington, D.C. They would just have to run for the hills.
Well, we're not a particularly political people in terms of politically engaged and that's part of who Americans are, I must say. They don't trust the government and they'd rather rely on themselves. And a lot of people came to this country to get away from wars and governments that had ruined their lives or not allowed them to worship in the ways that they wanted to. Didn't have the First Amendment in many places in the world. And so we came here with the understanding we just start our own lives and keep government out of it. I guess we have to elect people because, that's part of the deal. But, government is not that important. It's only important to about 2 to 3% of Americans that are politically active. 20% are what we call, scorekeepers that keep track and vote a little bit. Well, I'll vote for this. I like this person or I like that person. I'll vote for them. And some of it's very tribal, of course. And once it gets very tribal, as you know, then there's little compromise. Little compromise means very little gets done. And then the people start saying, why isn't government doing anything? Isn't that what they're there for? To get a budget done, to get the people's business done. But for the most part, 75% would rather play video games or watch TV or what have you,
Right.
rather than to dip into the political waters, because it's well, these days it's pretty dirty, that cesspool of politics, and the people are not being able to compromise and get things done.
I mean, you're not wrong at all. Not at all. When you look at that, thousands have been killed in the protests over there. I believe the current estimates, depending who you want to believe, is 3,000. Tehran says it's nowhere near that. But I believe it's the deadliest since this government's come to power.
Yes, I think because they've shut down the internet, shut down phone system, they've shut down any reporting on it. I've heard from anywhere from 2,500 confirmed to over 20,000 dead, at least 10,000 arrested. And for those that weren't already killed in the streets, there were planned public hangings for those 10,000. What has been confirmed that the last year in 2025, they hung between 1,000 and 2,000 people, which is the most that they've ever had to do because of political unrest in the history of the 47 years of this Islamic Republic. This is another thing that's become clear, that things are rotten in Tehran when you notice that you have to kill people in order to have your way and to reestablish order. Order should be because the people have a reasonable chance of making a living, eating, and having water in their pipe system.
That's water and pipes. We take that for granted here.
Yeah, we do. Think of all the things we take for granted. Whenever you go to a war zone, as I have, or former war zone, and you see what's there, or in a developing country where they don't even have the basic infrastructure of, transportation, housing, basic, we take grocery stores for granted and plumbing systems for granted and electricity for granted that many places in the world do not have.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last thing I'd read is the Iranian regime was planning on, at least the rumors are, cutting itself off even more so from the global internet rather than just a switch for it locally. At
least through March, from what I understand, I was on a local TV station with an Iranian expat who has connections back in Iran, family's still there. And she said that the death toll was way above what is being reported in the press, and that it's much worse than what it appears.
Jesus, that's no fun.
Well, it's no fun if you're there. It's no fun if you have family there. It's, and the hard thing is, when do we get involved? Because they're how many 8 billion people, and how many of those 8 billion are in poverty and under bad regimes? The United States cannot be the policeman of the world and go and put out fires everywhere, but it has to act in its own interests, economic, political, and military. And I think the Iranian situation is one where the United States does have an interest in seeing that it transform into a less autocratic country that serves the 90 million people of Iran better than it has thus far.
I mean, it's from what I'm understanding is the protests haven't disappeared like some people are trying to say. They've just kind of adapted under the blackout conditions.
Well, it's hard to know because there's no press coming out. There's no internet. The phone lines have been shut down, and the government controls the news. I'm sure through satellites and through intelligence gathering, people in our government know what's going on. Those of us that have to do podcasts for a living don't and can only speculate.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely very unfortunate, but I mean, just like we were saying earlier, it's the economy, stupid, right? This collapse to me seems the biggest core driver behind the social unrest there.
It is, and there's a political unrest there too, because the morality police, preventing women from doing X, Y, and Z, preventing youth from doing A, B, and C, making sure that, and who knows to what degree that's fair either. If you have a feud with another family and you have somebody in the morality police, you just pick up that person, throw them in jail, and say that they've done something against Sharia law. There's no real court system that allows for any complaints against what's going on.
Right. I mean, it's when you look at that, it's very, to me, it's very hard for what else could we do to really help them outside of militarily help the protesters, because we pretty much already have them completely isolated economically from our end.
Yes, sanctions have been on for quite some time, and they're getting stronger. And that has also to do with 80 to 90% of Iranian oil gets sold to China. And, so we place sanctions on that. So any oil that's getting sold from Iran is going to be more expensive to those that have to do business with the United States, and China has to do business with the United States. And so there is a very high tariff going on. And this whole thing with Venezuela and its oil, and the Chinese getting most of that too. You'll note that there is shall we say, a shadow economy of oil tankers selling, sanctioned oil. And the United States is now actively involved in trying to stop that. Iran is part of that strategy too, because they have the third largest reserves of oil in the world after Venezuela and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of this seems. Nobody seems to be talking about this, right? Kind of like with Venezuela. I mean, they did eventually, but is this more of our way of trying to isolate China further and further? Because this would be two huge oil suppliers that they would, in so many words, get cut off or strained from.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And and another thing is to limit the new access of authoritarianism's influence in our backyard or in areas where we can exercise some sort of influence. And so the more that the bad guys cooperate, the worse it will be for us at some place at some time. And so we have to fight. It's a new Cold War, if you will, but not just the Soviet Union and China, but this grouping of authoritarian states that are anti-American and anti-American interests.
No, I mean, it definitely seems that way. I mean, because Venezuela and Iran they're some of China's biggest oil suppliers outside of, I believe, Russia. And in India, how does this because I know obviously we've got the tariffs that we've been doing with China, and obviously we're trying to find a better trade deal. So does this put pressure on them to go, hey, you got to get this stuff done, or you got to come to the table with the United States more?
Well, I notice, that we're negotiating with China over what sort of tariff situation we should hold them accountable for on what sort of products and whatnot. And so this does put more pressure on China to make a deal with us, because their economy is going to hurt as a result of it, number one. And number two, another reason you do this is so that they don't have the ability to invade a place like Taiwan, which we are also allied with under the U.S.-Taiwan Relations Act of 1979. If China attacks Taiwan, we have to come to its aid. In fact, we deployed nuclear weapons under the Eisenhower administration in Taiwan to prevent the People's Republic of China from overtaking it. There are statues of Eisenhower that exist to this day on Taiwan because we had a mutual defense pact. It was just like NATO with Taiwan. That changed in 1979 under Jimmy Carter when we recognized one China being the People's Republic, but that's also when the Taiwan Relations Act was passed by Congress to counterbalance that by saying that, well, if Taiwan was ever attacked, 79 was a pretty important year for lots of reasons. Not just, that was my first year I went to Washington. You had the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. You had the Islamic Revolution in Iran. You had the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979. And, basically terrorism started to rear its ugly head in a religious context after 1979 because of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the Islamic Revolution in Iran. In fact, there's a great scholar at UCLA by the name of David Rappaport who came up with this very wonderful analysis of terrorism, that there were 4 waves of modern terrorism, and we're now in the 4th wave, a religious wave that started in 1979. The first were the anarchists back at the turn of the 19th century. William McKinley was assassinated by an anarchist. The second was the anti-colonialists that wanted to kick out those that had colonized their country, mostly Europeans for that matter. And the third was a new left, sort of a communist wave of terrorism that came under review. We had things like the Weather Underground here. You had the Red Brigades in Italy. You had the Baader-Meinhof in Germany, all saying power to the people, let's blow up capitalism. And then the religious wave that started in 1979, both the Sunni and the Shia extremists that saw that the infidels had to be eliminated so we could create another caliphate along the lines of the 7th century. So history matters. I'm sorry for those that don't like it, but it does. And even if we have to do back of the envelope history, it will help us understand why we're going through difficulties that we have today.
Yeah, I mean, it's history. I mean, I don't think history is necessarily boring. I think sometimes people just don't understand it, or sometimes certain folks, not necessarily you or I, because people seem to resonate with it, but I don't want to say
Well, you have
go
to
into
apply
too
it.
much
You have to,
yeah.
you learn to apply it, especially in foreign policy. If you don't know the background and context of the problem, you know nothing.
Right.
I teach, when I teach, I make people write policy memos to come up with a point of view on something, not just do a book report that, Persia was established in 550 BC by Cyrus the Great. Okay, what does that tell us? Well, not much, but it is part of the background and context. But what are the options of the particular problem you're looking at? And you have to look at all of them and do an analysis of what's good and what's bad about it. And then you have to understand what are the stakes for us economically, politically, and militarily. If we don't have any stakes, why are we talking about it? And then you have to pick one and suggest why we should go that way. And that's what a policy memo does. And it suggests a policy to be followed that's in the interests of the United States, economically, politically, or militarily. And all of those have to align for us to take action. So in Venezuela, you had the economic issue of the oil. Politically, you had communists and outside interference from Russia and China. And militarily, politically also, you had the drug war that was killing Americans. And you also had military influence of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea coming into Venezuela that we did not want in the hemisphere. So we had all 3 things that required this particular president to act, which he did. And you have to have, those 3 things line up in just about any action that puts American lives on the line.
Yeah, I mean, we don't seem to have an option when it comes down to that.
Well, you always have options, but you have to know why something's important before you act. And if it is important, then you have to act. If you don't, then you may have to act later. And what are the opportunity costs of acting later? It's going to cost more usually than if you nip something in the bud, but it's always a crapshoot.
No, I mean it is. It's their narrative over there seems to always blame foreign influence instead of actually addressing their problems that they have there is to why their people are suffering.
Well, whenever you're pointing at somebody, there are three fingers pointing back at you. And that's always the case. And people think that foreign policy, you start a war, then you're detracting from your own domestic political problems. And then you rally around the flag, rally around the president, and that takes away. You hear that in any administration, Democratic or Republican, or any democratic country that has to do something overseas. Why are they doing it overseas now? Is it have to do with the political problems at home? You never know. But I think that good analysis requires that there be specific reasons for your actions, and good foreign policy has that analysis before you move forward.
I mean, it's rough. When we kind of look at this whole conversation we've had about it, and knowing, obviously, we both watched some Golden Murray and some of the,
Yeah.
what's the one thing that you see just in general from A to Z that seems to be the biggest misconception maybe that Americans don't realize?
The biggest misconception that foreign policy doesn't matter. I think that it does matter, because eventually we will have to get involved, and that includes more taxpayer dollars, more servicemen and women's lives, and more investment in national defense. That if we were to nip something in the bud, we'd save a lot of money. And if Americans would understand that it's important, and those that serve in the military do because their lives are on the line, and their families understand it because their loved ones are on the line, I think that, it makes sense to understand foreign policy is not the last chapter in a political science book, which it always is. It's the last chapter in every political science book that I've ever looked at, and I've taught political science for 20 years. We have to talk about this. It's kind of important. Well, it's kind of important that it be in the middle of the book, not at the end of the book, and that we think more in terms of what do we need to know about Iran to understand why the people are rioting. Are the people rioting because they're unhappy with democracy, or they want democracy? I think it's the latter.
I definitely think they do.
When the Berlin Wall fell, which way did the East Germans run? Towards Russia or towards West Germany?
West Germany.
They ran. Yeah. So, understanding the background and context of foreign policy, we can't mirror image everything either. Other countries aren't like us, and we need to understand from their perspective what's their economic, political, and military interests, so that we can align or not align with theirs. And that means spending a little more time understanding those three very important things: econ, political, and military. Those are the three key variables that we often overlook in total. It's always about the oil. Is it always about the oil? It's not just about the oil. Oh, it's always about communism versus fascism. Is it always about that? It's not always about that. It's always about, we spend too much for the military. Is it always about that, or is it something else that we're worried about? So I guess thinking a little more comprehensively about foreign policy, rather than just taking the 2-minute soundbite off of a station that may have a particular point of view. Why not watch, those that have this point of view and that point of view, and come to your own conclusions, rather than take sides with one or the other?
Right. I mean, to me, that just makes a whole lot of sense.
Isn't that what the middle ground, Mike, is about?
Supposed to be. It's supposed to be. I posted a couple shorts. One was, two of them were really going at people per se who attacked the middle. I did that episode with his name's Z, guy, the White House fellow from China, and people are like, "Oh, you're a member of the CCP propaganda." I had people from China saying I was Western propaganda, and I'm like, man, really? Like, you guys are just hearing a couple words or phrases and just assuming that's what everything is about, and that's the reasons behind it.
Well, when you're in the public eye, you'll get accused of everything, and Having a public discussion about anything that's controversial, you're gonna burn somebody's ears, and you're gonna make somebody mad. But the point is not to make people mad; it's to get a point of view out there that makes the most sense. And if you can't have free and open debate in a democratic society, what is it good for? And one of the things I love about Oxford University is they really dive into debate, and at the end of the debate, no matter how heated it gets, everyone goes to the pub, has a beer, and says, "Well, touche. You made some good points. So did I. Let's move forward."
Right, and that's how it's
And
supposed to go.
well, it's supposed to, but it doesn't. It's become more polarized, and especially when you have social media that can be manipulated, not just within the country, but by others outside the country to get a point of view across, which may or may not even be true.
Yeah, you're not wrong at all. Ron, I really appreciate you coming on tonight. It's this situation just seems like it's only going to boil more and more. The problem is now is we can't see it live like we have the last couple of weeks.
Yes. And, one thing I worry about, there's no unified leadership in the protests. It's spontaneous and it's not organized. And there were some Starlink bootleg, satellite link ups that I don't know how those are working now. But the issue is if we were to attack, which we may attack the IRGC and the Basij paramilitary and the police that are harming the protesters, we can't be sure that that's going to, number one, topple the regime. It'll save lives, but it would probably contribute towards the eventual collapse of the regime. But we don't know how much it would help.
That's always a challenge regardless. Ron, I really appreciate you being on here tonight. I'm sure we're gonna have to get back on this one again soon, because this just seems to be boiling.
Yeah.
I don't even feel like we've hit a boil over point yet.
No, I'm booked for the next week on a number of TV and radio programs, anticipating that something's going to happen. So I'm assuming it will, and that we can discuss that when it does.
Yeah. Ron, thanks for coming on, everybody. You got to keep watching these episodes of Ron. The more and more we put out, the more popular they seem to get. Everyone just keeps growing and growing. So people are really liking this stuff.
Well, I hope so. And that's the idea, that I am just trying to share what I've learned, which has been my passion over 40 years of doing this stuff.
Yeah, no, and I thank everybody for tuning in and joining me and Ron. Ron, go ahead and tell everybody about your organization again as we close it out.
Yes. If you're interested in learning more about international relations, come join us at Oxford University in July for 3 weeks, where 15 professors, British and American, talk about the subject matters that they know best and have done in government within either the British or the American government, including myself. It's called the Oxford Study Abroad Program. You can learn about it, the International Relations Program, at learnthroughtravel.com. That's my website. I promote it because I think it's important for people to learn about the world.
Awesome. All right. Everybody check it out. I mean, you can never learn enough. That's the best way to say it, really. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We got some great content coming this week. Ron, thanks for coming on. I hope everybody has a good night.
Thank you, Joe. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.